Alright, so we are in the midst of Ramadan and Eid is coming up pretty soon in a couple weeks. So I wanted to recommend some books to you that are books that are by Muslim authors, that follow Muslim characters, and that explore their relationships with Islam. Because I know a lot of Muslim readers often complain about Muslim stories not really talking about Islam and the characters' relationships with Islam. So hopefully these are some books that Muslim readers will enjoy, and those of you who are not Muslims could also get something out of it. Or maybe you're looking to buy an Eid gift for somebody or a Muslim reader in your life. These might be some really good options as well. I have one kids book, I have 2 young adult novels, and I have 3 adult novels, so there's something here for everybody. So the first book is the kids book. It's a middle grade book called Once Upon an Eid, which was edited by S.K. Ali and Aisha Saeed, and it's a compilation of about 15 short stories by 15 different Muslim authors of various backgrounds about the joys and the wonders of Eid, both Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. It's a really interesting story that kind of explores, how people celebrate Eid, different characters going through different problems and scenarios during Eid. Some of the stories are really heartfelt and deep and kind of sad. Some of the stories are just joyous and fun and filled with humor. And a lot of the stories are a mixture of all of those things. It's a wonderful, very diverse, vibrant collection that I think everybody will enjoy regardless of their religion and regardless of their age. But if you're looking for something for those younger Muslim readers in your life, this is definitely the perfect Eid gift, I would say. I mean, it's called Once Upon an Eid. Who wouldn't want to buy somebody this for Eid? Next up, I have Love From A to Z by S.K. Ali, one of the editors of Once Upon an Eid, and this is a really, really adorable young adult novel about these 2 characters, Adam and Zainab, who meet on a flight to Doha, and it's about the relationship that kind of ensues after that. Adam is a very quiet, reserved, wholesome, shy person, whereas Zainab is a little bit more feisty and outspoken, so they're very much like yin and yang, they are complete opposites, but they come together and balance each other out so well, so it's a wonderful exploration of that relationship and that dynamic. Also, if you're a Muslim who is concerned about like premarital contact and physical intimacy and that kind of stuff, this book doesn't have any of that. These 2 characters don't, interact with each other or show their affection or intimacy towards each other in that way because they're not married. But they get to know each other and they get to connect in different ways. And I think that was actually a really beautiful thing about this story, the fact that we didn't need to see the physical contact between the 2 of these characters in order for it to be a legit romantic story with a very wonderful romantic connection between the 2 characters. I really enjoyed that. In addition to this being a story about the 2 of them and their relationship with each other, it's also a story about their very separate journeys. The both of them have very separate issues, very individual issues that they're dealing with, and the book also takes time to focus in on them as individuals. So it's not just a story about the 2 of them and their relationship with each other, but it's also about their own personal journeys as well. And it's a wonderful, wonderful read, and everybody should read it. Next up, I have All American Muslim Girl by Nadine Jolie Courtney, and this one is a story about a young Muslim girl from a Muslim family that doesn't really practice. So her parents don't really practice Islam and they're not super religious, so she didn't really grow up with Islam so much, and because she's a white passing Arab and she isn't really so connected with Islam and all that kind of stuff, she kind of grows up being seen as and being treated as and experiencing the world as a typical American white girl. So it's about her sort of connecting with her heritage for the first time, but also connecting with Islam for the first time. She begins her journey into Islam. She starts to, read the Quran, and she starts praying for the first time. And it's a story about her journey into the faith and, her reacquainting herself with not just her heritage, but her religion. But then that gets complicated because she's actually dating this white boy whose father is like this Fox News-esque reporter who hates Muslims. So that creates a bit of tension in the story that makes it a really interesting read. Lots of Muslim readers speak very highly of this book because it's very much a love letter to Islam without being a preachy novel. In fact, none of the books that I'm recommending to here are books that are particularly trying to preach to the reader about Islam or are trying to tell the reader, that Islam is the one religion that you need to convert to, or anything like that. The books is more so about the character's relationship with Islam. So you don't have to be a Muslim to read these books and enjoy them and to, feel connected with these characters and their journeys. But if you are Muslim, these books and this one in particular can be very affirming, and they're just wonderful, delightful reads that celebrate Islam in a time where Islam is not always celebrated, obviously. So definitely highly recommend that you pick up All American Muslim Girl. Moving on to the adult novels, we first have Hijab in Red Lipstick by Yusra Imran, and this is an interesting story that takes place primarily in the Gulf, in a unnamed Gulf country, and it's about this girl originally from Britain. Her family is of Egyptian heritage, and they move to the Gulf, and her father becomes involved in much more like fundamental Islam, and that really takes a toll on the main character and her sister and her mother, the women in the family, and how they become subjected to this sort of like overly patriarchal rule. It's an interesting book that does not try to stereotype Islam in that way, obviously, but it does try to explore how subscription to more fundamental strands of Islam can lead to overzealous interpretations of the Quran that deem women as, you know, objects, as, you know, less powerful than men, giving them less authority and all that kind of stuff. So the book kind of delves into how that affects the main character living in a country and in a society and in a community where she feels voiceless, where she essentially feels like she doesn't have a say in her family, where she is constantly dismissed, where she's antagonized, where she's viewed as a problem, as a potential, you know, issue or threat to the family. And the story makes clear that that is not what Islam is and what Islam is supposed to be. The main character holds steadfast to her faith whilst trying not to embrace those types of ideologies. So it becomes this really interesting tug of war between her definition of Islam and her father's definition of Islam, and, you know, her trying to find a way to be a part of her faith and to embrace her religion without, you know, subjecting herself and conceding to these very ludicrous ideas that don't necessarily have to do with Islam in the first place. It's a really interesting book. It's very fast-paced, very difficult to read. I picked this up thinking it was going to be a little bit more lighthearted, and it does start out that way. But then when we delve more into the main character's life and her experiences, we start to realize that, you know, it's very dark, lots of bad things happen to her, and it's the kind of book that you definitely kind of want to, you know, take care of yourself while you're reading it. Another book I'd highly recommend is The Beauty of Your Face by Sahar Mustafa. So this one follows a woman named Afaf, who is the principal of this all-girls Muslim school in Chicago, and then a school shooter, a white supremacist school shooter, comes into the school and begins like shooting and killing students and teachers. And Afaf is in the namaz room, and the shooter comes into the room, and then she's stuck in the room with him. And from there, we spend the rest of the book like going into flashbacks into Afaf's life, and we also get some flashbacks into the terrorist's life as well. Afaf comes from a Palestinian immigrant family, and her family is very dysfunctional. Her older sister went missing when Afaf was a very young age, and that sort of scarred the family for the rest of their lives and made their relationships with each other kind of miserable. And just like All American Muslim Girl, they weren't a particularly religious Muslim family, so the book kind of follows Afaf as she finds Islam after a while, and she begins to wear the hijab and she begins to get more involved in religion, and the story becomes an exploration of how the Muslim community became a solace for her, even though there were some toxic elements to it. For the most part, the Muslim community became a solace for her. It became a coping mechanism for that kind of tumultuous background that she came from. So it's a really interesting exploration of Islamic identity, faith, immigrant identity, Islamophobia, and how all of that manifests into this one character's life. It's really good, and not enough people read this book and talk about it, so I highly recommend that you give it a try. Finally, I have to recommend one of my favorite books, and that is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. So this is a really good book because it doesn't have any overly traumatic or harsh themes like the last two books. It is still very sad and emotional, but more so because of the individual circumstances of this family rather than any sort of like greater structural issue or anything like that. So it follows this Indian Shia Muslim family living in Southern California. One of the daughters is getting married at the beginning of the book, and the son of the family returns, and he's been estranged for a couple of years. So his return is a little bit awkward. It's the first time that he's seeing his sisters and his parents in a really long time. And then from there, again, it like delves into all sorts of like flashbacks. We go into their childhood and their teenagers and their young adulthood, and we're just sort of exploring the family's relationships with each other, and we are getting to the point of like kind of unearthing how it is this young man became distant from his family, like what happened to trigger that. It has to do with the family's own like relationships with each other, but how that is also influenced by culture and religion, and how, you know, culture and religion are a source of solace, and how it, you know, shapes the family and it helps them to make sense of who they are in the environment that they're in. But it also has some negative elements that creates difficulties and obstacles in the family being honest with each other and vulnerable with each other. So it's a really interesting interesting exploration of family dynamics and dysfunctionality without this family necessarily being a terribly dysfunctional or toxic family. It kind of explores how toxic traits and dysfunctional traits can still show up in otherwise good family environments, and how do you deal with that, right? So it's a wonderful, wonderful book, lovely writing, great storytelling. I cried many times throughout this story, and it's definitely one that you don't want to pass up. So there you have it. Those are 6 recommendations for 6 novels that follow Muslim characters, written by Muslim authors, and that explore the families and the characters' relationships with Islam. In the comments down below, I'd love to know if you have any recommendations like this, or if you've read any of these books and you have any thoughts on them. All of that being said though, thank you all ever so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely, lovely day, and until next time, inshallah, keep reading.